Failed Swordsman of Sylvania Academy, my most favorite game, and also the best game of the year. But my life turned upside down when suddenly I got transmigrated into this world and possessed the body of a most hated third-rate villain who has no impact in the story. Though I would love to live this life if I were to be the main character of the story. But the character I possess ended up begging on the streets. There are multiple adventurous scenes going to come, and I can be the part of it, but I don't want this story to fall apart. I just need to survive.
A bright yellow chandelier hangs from the ceiling, illuminating the room and making it sparkle with the light of its many burning candles. This is the dorm room of the ruffian's son from a high-ranking noble family who reigned over the Magic Academy like a king. The ruffian's son is this story's narrator and technical protagonist. He sits in his large luxurious dorm room with a grand bed and rich polished furniture, considering his life. Unfortunately, the ruffian luck has run out as he's been charged with many egregious and downright unforgivable sins such as using profanity in the presence of the honorable princess, like a foul-mouthed drunken sailor, wrongfully meddling in the entrance examination, disregarding decency, and smearing the family name by getting blinded by jealousy. All of these are sins that his household cannot overlook. To cut a long story short, he's getting stripped like a harlot from the family register because he's made way more trouble than they can put up with. It feels like the god of fate is ridiculing me, he laments with his head in his hands. The ruffian's name is Ed Roth Taylor and his life was over. He is tossed out of his grand dorm with all his belongings packed in a few brown suitcases. His belongings are also tossed beside him in the dirt and they don't even bother to acknowledge him once they've thrown him on the floor. Thank you for your hard work, they say without a drop of sincerity in their tone. Other students jeer at him when they spot him. Some students point him out in shock and others try not to make direct eye contact like they're scared of catching a disease only he can spread. Ed has become the gossip of the academy and some of the students wonder about the point of walking on eggshells around him. After all, he was disowned and thrown out of his dorm room so he has no power to use against them. They likely won't even see him in the next semester. Some of the students blame him for his own misfortune. They felt he should have known better than to attempt to rig the entrance exam and they call him a filthy noble. All these insults echo through the halls and gardens to Ed who is left stewing on a bench with suitcases by his side while a dark depressing aura surrounds him. Ed thinks this is all unfair and that sort of thinking is to be expected. After all, the arrogant Ed that all the students are jeering isn't even the same person. It turns out that the reality where the magical school exists was actually a game and our weeping protagonist entered the game while playing on his computer back home. The game was set in the magical school called Sylvania Academy and won the award of Best Game of the Year. The game, titled The Failed Swordsman of Sylvania, was his favorite game. Our boy is not too surprised about entering a game as he's familiar with this genre in the comics he reads. Usually when someone enters a game, they end up possessing the abilities of either the main hero or the main villain. It could be someone cool like the first son of a super rich family, a genius ruffian, a young clan master, or a top S-rank hunter character who's badass and always breaks the rules. Unfortunately for our hero, he's drawn the short straw and ended up in the body of a third-rate villain who gets kicked out of the dorms at the beginning of the game. He's not even a relevant character. His name isn't cool either because what kind of name is Ed Roth Taylor? The developers basically designed him to fail. He's possessed the worst of characters at the worst of times and it is truly a misfortune to land in the body of someone else just after they had messed up beyond repair. Our hero screams into the sky in protest about how unfair his situation is. He's always lived a frugal and simple life with no greed. However, the other students hear him yelling and think the arrogant Ed is just boasting again and saying things are unfair when he's filled his life with nothing but wicked deeds. They also call him out for saying he's frugal when they know he's a shameless scumbag. That stops our boy short and he's left gaping in embarrassment and shock. Spirit broken, he sits in humble silence as the students storm away in anger. Our boy sighs and glances to his side and is surprised to see a status window open before him. It tells him that Ed Roth Taylor is 17, in year 2, and a male of the human race with 0 achievements. The status window also reveals that Ed is useless with a level 3 stamina and level 4 intellect. He however has level 7 for talent, level 7 for willpower, and a bonus level 6 for luck, so he's not entirely hopeless. However, my guy is still heavily disappointed by Ed's pathetic stats. Despite studying in the Faculty of Magic, his intellect is next to nothing and his stamina is way too low for a noble. He figures that this is why Ed never amounted to anything more than a third-rate villain because even in his memories of playing the game, Ed exists as nothing but a blur. It's so bad that he can't even recall what happened to him later in the game. Suddenly, our guy is struck with enlightenment and recalls exactly what happened to poor useless Ed Roth-Taylor. In a corner of the game's ending credits, he remembers an elderly-looking man with a thin mustache wearing a suit and crouched in the corner of the street with no shoes. The man was Ed Roth-Taylor and his ending was begging on the streets like a bum. Thinking over it logically, our hero deduces that Ed's end was no real surprise. He'd been a ruffian noble who knew nothing about the world and was suddenly thrown into the streets. The begging bad end aside, Ed was lucky that he'd somehow stayed alive. However, the news remained depressing for the poor guy who was now stuck living Ed's miserable life. He was so scared of the future that he turned as white as a sheep. Sighing once more in disappointment, he doesn't know why he of all people has come to possess Ed's body and has no idea how to find out the reason behind this mix-up. However, he picks up his suitcase, determined not to let begging become his ending. He stands with determination burning in his pale eyes as he glares ahead. He declares that he will succeed no matter what, for they say once you've hit rock bottom, the only place to go is up. Despite being a school, Sylvania Academy is more like a city with the entire arc and mountains as its premises. The valley is expansive with green grass growing around the white glistening towers of the school. Our guy journeys to the undeveloped forest northeast of the academy to escape the prying eyes of the students. He is covered in sweat and exhausted, but he makes it deep into the woods and pauses to sit on his suitcase after walking for half a day. Amazingly, he manages to lug both suitcases out of there by himself since Ed is not exactly the most built noble there is. Since he's been disowned and is now the disgrace of the school, there's plenty of time for him to ponder the next step to take even though his odds aren't looking good. Back in the game, Ed getting disowned was the extreme starting point of the scenario. Though he was disowned, Ed was not expelled, and that part is extremely important because Sylvania Academy is a top-notch learning facility. Just graduating from Sylvania is sure to get a student a guaranteed and secure future. Thanks to our hero obsessing over the game so much, he can now use the intel of a 5-time dedicated player of the game to its fullest. He still has a chance of success so long as he graduates quietly. Then he can acquire a soft, comfortable life, a life even more awesome than the one he left in the past world. So his obvious goal is graduation. He scratches out that word in the sand, dreams of towers of golden coins flashing in his mind. However, to achieve this newfound dream of his, he first needs to tackle a few issues, the first of which is the steep tuition fees. As someone disowned and kicked to the curb, he has absolutely no money to pay his way through school, and it's not like he's talented enough to get a scholarship either. The good news is the current semester has already been paid for by his wealthy noble family, so he can use the time he has left to achieve a scholarship for the next semester. However, Ed's stats are still looking ridiculous and downright depressing, but our boy is not about to give up just yet. Even though he thinks he'd be lucky not to flunk out with those bad stats, he decides he'll worry about tuition later and instead focus on more pressing matters like how he's going to survive now that he's gotten his ass kicked out of the dorms. The things he needs now are food, clothes, and shelter. He snaps open his luxurious suitcase to take a peek at what he has to work with for around the next week to avoid turning into a bum. He finds in his suitcase a collection of showy clothing with no extra stats or powers, ceremonial daggers that are just as useless, and even the more useless ornamental cup. It's not looking good, but at least he has clothes. The problem now is having no place to stay or food to eat, and Ed's awful reputation is not going to make it easy to achieve either. He sits on the floor to ponder the issue, which makes him look like a bum in practice. Since he can't return to the dorm that he was kicked out of, he decides to stick in the woods for the time being. There is at least a clean stream nearby, and that accounts for water. Our boy has 10 days until school starts, so he's going to use that time to whip into shape. Ed starts by practicing the magic move Wind Blade. He uses it to send blades of wind against tree trunks. He feels like he's making good progress but quickly realizes how exhausting it is. Wind Blade is a basic skill in magic combat that is handy for cutting things, but it's also very tiring for our dear weak boy. Huffing and puffing, he feels hunger pangs in his belly. Suddenly he remembers something that his grandfather told him, when he was young, when barley was scarce while his grandfather was a child. He said they'd eat tree bark in the back mountains, and so Ed stares dubiously at the barks of the trees he cut down. Unfortunately, he is desperate enough to try it within minutes. He's using ignition to boil up the bark of a tree inside the ceremonial cup. Anything edible is good enough for him to try to fight off the hunger. He is so hungry that he convinces himself the tree bark looks like chicken breasts. Excited, he stuffs the wood in his mouth and chews with high hopes. As expected, his hopes plummet and he ends up spitting the entire thing out. Humans might be omnivores, but there's a limit. Day 3 in the forest comes around and Ed is starting to look like a starved, reanimated corpse. He sends his hate to his grandpa for his useless advice. After starving for a day and throwing up for 2 more days, he concluded that he'd stop trying to eat wood and instead use it to build a house. He needed shelter to weather off harsh weather conditions, so he gets busy. First things first, he raises the frame to support the wood of the house. He only has 2 hands, so he struggles to set up the 4 supports. It is not an easy job and he quickly crashes during his first pathetic attempt. However, it's either succeed or die trying, so he forces himself to his feet again, his face burning red as he quickly ties the frame into place. He takes a moment to rest after that. 1 success, but he's still got a long way to go since he can't sleep on the ground. He tosses his luxurious clothes to the floor and uses them as a sort of mat. It's a waste of nice fancy clothes, but it's not like he has a choice. The next day comes and he successfully crafts a tent made of wood, which he extremely proud of. The status window suddenly becomes active and informs him that his crafting proficiency has increased since he crafted the basic wood shelter to completion. He is now a novice craftsman with level 4 in handiness, level 1 in design, and level 1 in gathering ability. Ed would be so much more impressed if he wasn't dying of starvation. He does realize though that he missed out on his talents, because he was a noble, so he never found out that he's more talented with his hands than he is with magic. So my guy utilizes it handiness and creates a simple harpoon, a ceremonial strapped to a well-shaped tree trunk. He harnesses his newly crafted weapon like a madman, determined to find something to eat. 2 days on an empty stomach with excessive physical labor has been bad for him. Only desperation keeps him going as he madly jabs at the water in a wild attempt to catch fish. He successfully catches 2 and he roasts them over a fire with the ignition spell. A week until school starts and he finally tastes food, so it's no wonder that his eyes are finally sparkling with joy. He just has to hold out as he is right now. If he can manage to hold out until then he'll be able to get through school without much trouble. However, he was so busy eating that he forgot something important and nearly choked on the fish. When someone appeared before him, a beautiful girl with long blonde hair and shiny golden eyes, it looks like in his quest for survival my guy had completely forgotten about the main characters of the story. But of all the people, he had not expected to run into this particular individual. She is the disciplinarian and strict Princess Fionia, and she's the one who got Ed Roth Taylor kicked out of the dorms. The issue is that Ed Roth Taylor is a villain who appears as soon as player starts the game. Ed appeared instantly in the game. He used his status as a noble to hit on the main character's childhood friend but ended up being hit. However, since he's vengeful and malicious, he messed with the main character's entrance exam, only to be caught by the princess, who was hiding her identity, Phoenicia Elias Claw. She has an ability called Insight that detects when someone is lying, and she used this to expose Ed, which got him out of the dorm and made everyone hate Ed. She asks him again what he's doing here, asking why he isn't expelled. He says that he was only kicked out of the dorms. She says that she'll keep it short, telling him to leave. She can't stand seeing someone so shameless around the school. She'll request his expulsion personally. While she yaps, he realizes that his food is burning, and he says this whole situation is a crisis since she's a princess. She truly has the power to get him expelled. He says he has a plan. He tells her that the sun will set soon, and aren't the royals meant to be guarded? So, to think a princess would come to this isolated forest all by herself. She says if he's trying to threaten her, he'll regret it. He says it's not a threat. He starts to kneel, saying he's just thanking her. She uses insight and asks what he means but instantly sees that he's telling the truth. She's surprised. He says good, while explaining to us viewers that the Roth Taylor are influential, but by using that name to exploit the citizens and doing human experiments for eternal life, they get hated by the main character, and they all end up being imprisoned or executed. But he's disowned now. His fish is burnt now, and he says it's better to eat that than to starve. But it's a good chance to convince Fionia, since if he doesn't, it'll be game over for him. He says that since there's a week until school, there's only one reason Fionia is out in the woods. He tells her that since she's here without her guards, it must be for the class placement test. It's a test from Professor Glast, which tasks those who accept it to find magic beads in the forest. Ed says that it's a rough one, and since it's Fionia, she'll for sure be aiming for Class A. She asks if he's trying to flatter her, saying he hasn't changed one bit, and she'll go get him expelled now. He tells her that without his help she'll never be able to enter Class A. If his words are a lie, he'll accept the expulsion. He tells her to go to the lake at the southeast of the forest. She'll find a small grassy island with a giant tree in the middle of the island. The tree is called Mela's guardian tree, and underneath the roots, there will be a present that is left for her. We see her holding a bead and she says that the Ed from a few days ago was definitely lying scum. However, the Ed just now is the complete opposite, and she's lost for words. It jumps to the class placement test finally being over, and Glass tells everyone to take out the beads they've acquired. We see some odd beads that do not belong in this mana, and he tells them all they'll start in Class F. The test isn't about finding any magic bead, and those who found beads lacking in magic power are the only ones to make Class A. Only 3 people found them, a man named Zix, a woman named Lurel, and lastly, the one who found a bead with the highest magic power, none other than Fenia, who is declared the top of the class. It jumps back to Ed. He says he doesn't have the strength to hold a spear anymore. We see he's made a crude fishing rod, and he's using a small nail as bait. He explains how since she was young, Fenia has seen through flattery and sophistry, which led to her insight skill being developed, which nobody can lie through. So he had no choice but to be honest with her, which in turn will create a bigger problem. The reason why Fenia will come to be called the Princess of Love after being placed in F-class, but now she won't end up in F-class since she found the bead, so the original story will begin to collapse. Even if he manages to avoid being expelled, all the information he has would become useless. We got roped along. It turns out that Fenia isn't top of her class, it's a sleeping girl named Lucy Merrill, so the future might not change. Fenia starts to think about the situation and how Ed didn't lie about the bead, but it isn't her present. She hid her identity since she didn't want special treatment. She wanted to prove herself. She knew the bead would give good results, but she didn't want to take it since it isn't something she'd have accomplished on her own. And the title Princess of Love isn't a skill or a stat but a title she'd gained from walking a righteous path. He threw the bead out as bait. Whether it was the truth or not didn't matter, Fenia could tell anyways. He believed that she'd fail, and she thought she'd succeed and rub it into his face. But Ed didn't lie to her about her not being able to enter Class A, and Fenia was left unable to do anything. Ed pulls his line out of the river, showing that he's actually managed to catch a fish, so he won't be starving today. It cuts to later with him running in the woods. He says that he may be living far from school and has to leave really early in the morning to get to school on time, but that's fine with him as he's still in the academy. The school opening ceremony begins, and while a teacher is giving a speech, some of the other students start to whisper about Ed, asking how dare he show his face here. But we see him absolutely munching away, saying he plans to enjoy every minute of it. Some girls start to talk about how he looks like a noble as he eats, but they stop gossiping and head off to go find some desserts. One of the girls says that's strange, saying that Ed feels like a different person now. It jumps again to the dean's office, and Ed looks ghostly pale, saying he almost got expelled. He didn't think that Fenia would tell the dean about him, though seeing how the dean was smiling, it must not have been bad. He sighs in relief, saying he needs to make sure the story doesn't stray from the original. Ed explains how his skills are focused towards survival currently, and to pair that with the magic he's training, there's no better weapon than a bow. As he downs a rabbit, he explains he'll be able to craft good quality arrows and put magic formulas on them. While he's looking at the rabbit he caught, he's surprised when he sees the girl from earlier reading under a tree. We're introduced to her, she's Yunuka Failover, and she's a genius spirit sorcerer. She looks over at him and says it seems like he's the amusing one that Marilla was talking about. She quickly hops over and introduces herself to him. She asks if he's surprised that she knows about him, and she explains that the forest is the territory of Marilla, a high-ranking spirit, and she talked about him. He asks what she said, and Yunuka says that Marilla is nosy, so she's been keeping an eye on Ed. He looks awkwardly at the rabbit he's holding and doesn't know what to say. Yunuka reassures him it's fine since the natural order is for creatures in the forest to eat one another. Marilla doesn't mind. Ed says it looks like even a giant wolf has a tender heart, and Yunuka looks curiously, saying that's unexpected and laughs. Then she says she has something to show him. She holds her hands out, saying that she signed a contract with this little guy yesterday. She asks if he wants to touch it, and he says if he wants to befriend her, he needs to chime in at the right time, but quickly sighs, telling her he cannot see spirits. She's surprised that he can't, and he tells her yeah, and he only came for some food, so he'll be going. He decides it's best to try and keep the story just like the original, and Yunuka, someone who is very important to the storyline, is someone he must not get close to. She watches him walk away. She recalls him mentioning the wolf thing, then pets Marilla, who is a wolf, saying it's interesting since it really seemed like he couldn't see her at all, so how'd he know she's a wolf? She jumps into Marilla's fur, saying she tried so hard to be nice to him, but he just answered with yep and yep over and over. She says geez, but it's not like they won't see each other again, so she'll just take it slow. Ed explains how the distance between his shelter and the academy isn't close at all. He barely makes it running at full speed, leaving at dawn, but it increases his stats. And if he wants the scholarship, he has to study more diligently. He writes on a stone slab using a burned stick on his way home. He washes his clothes, then he checks if he has enough firewood and food for tomorrow, which means he only sleeps for 4 hours. But that's not what is bothering him. He asks Yunuka how long she's going to keep following him. She's surprised he knew, and he says it'd be stranger if he didn't. He asks if she doesn't know who he is, saying he's the delinquent Ed, so why is she here? She says that's just what others think of him, and she smiles, saying she doesn't even know him yet. He says this is the type of character Yunuka is. She may look naive, but she's a really independent thinker. However, knowing what's in store for her in the future, he can't just respond with a blank smile on his face because Yunuka is the final boss of the first act. Even though she's the only character who smiles and is nice to him, he didn't want to do this. He says since destiny brought them together, can she do him a favor? She asks what, all excited, and he says surely she can see that he's a mess and that he's having a hard time. Then he asks her for some money. She turns into stone. He says he'll pay her back, and this is what friends are for, asking how much money she has. He lets us viewers know that she's always the top of her class, so she has a scholarship. But her background is extremely poor, so without the scholarship, she can't enroll or advance to a higher class in school. Being the daughter of a small ranch, her biggest weakness is money. She blankly stares at him, then says sorry while fading out. He looks guilty, and 3 days go by without her coming back. He says he feels bad about it, but he doesn't want to get entangled with the important characters, so he'll be careful so the story does not stray. He heads back into his shelter, then drops his basket out of surprise since someone even more important to the story than Yunuka just arrived. She's a rare genius and the most powerful character in the game. It's Lucy Merrill, who is sleeping in his shelter. She wakes up, and he wonders why she's here, saying he's too loud and she can't sleep. He says he wasn't saying anything, and she says not him, but the wolf behind him won't stop talking to him. Of course, it's Marilla, who is asking him to someday save Yunuka at all costs. A few days later, Lucy has only been here for a few days, so surely it won't lead to anything. But of course, that was just a complacent thought. It jumps to a joint combat training quest with a ring and students cheering. It's a mock one-on-one combat exercise to minimize lethality. Students use fake weapons, which will of course have the most important people in the game being put on the stage, and even the protagonist, who is the failed swordmaster, Taylor. Ed looks excited, wondering if his match is next. He says he knows the results, so he wasn't paying attention too much since the winners are first-year students like Taylor, except for Yunuka, who tries to talk to Ed again, who says he can't believe she's so nice even after he asked her for money. He says if Lucy is like a cat, Yunuka is closer to a dog. He tells her he doesn't care for the matches, and she asks, what about his? He then starts to sweat nervously, asking if he has to fight. He says Ed would be expelled by now, so who is he even going to fight? Taylor gets on stage, saying he will perform to the best of his abilities. Ed says he just needs to focus on watching the match, since, even if it was from a screen, he lived as Taylor for so long. From the miserable endings to the true endings, he was there for it all. He did it countless times, there wasn't a single route that wasn't arduous and difficult. So he's cheering Taylor on to his fullest ability. Then the announcement asks for Lucy to appear on stage, and he wonders where the hell she went. He spots her feet sticking out while she sleeps, and he yells, telling her to finish the duel first. It's Taylor fighting Lucy, and while Taylor has never held a sword before in his life, the first swing he does cuts through Lucy's lightning magic, which caught her off guard. He took the chance to close the gap, so she shot out another lightning spell, which overpowered Taylor. But Lucy gets disqualified for using intermediate magic, making Taylor the first one to defeat Lucy. It was such a cool scene in the game. He watches as the match is finally underway, and Taylor charges in to just instantly be deleted by Lucy. Taylor is knocked out, and Ed is completely silent. Lucy yawns, and the other students say nobody expected him to beat the top of the class, after all. Taylor's life was always full of trials. He was a country bumpkin and a failure of a student. He hadn't gotten a single decent grade since starting. He was a failure, unacknowledged by anyone. We see Taylor slowly standing back up as Ed says he's never lost hope ever. And he cheers him on in his head. Taylor charges back into Lucy, and as he gets close, Ed says now she'll use lightning magic, but he's surprised when he sees that she doesn't. She blocks Taylor's weapon with a wind spell, and he tries to break through it, but a beast made of wind roars at him, knocking him out of the stage and into the wall past Ed. Brother's face is implanted into that shit, then falls down. Ed says this isn't how it was meant to happen. Lucy is declared the winner, and Taylor looks defeated. Ed is surprised since Taylor wasn't meant to lose. Ed watches Taylor walk away and says this is a big problem. He cannot leave him alone. The magic used is due to forming a contract with Murelda. She approaches Ed, asking if he'll give her jerky. He ignores her, and Phinia tries to talk to him too, but he ignores her as well, which surprises her since he looks pissed. He calls out to Taylor, saying he doesn't know if this will matter, but it's better than just sitting still. Taylor stops walking, and Ed tells him not to give up on his efforts. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. He tells Taylor he did great and to be proud. It was just an unlucky matchup. He tells him not to let this get him down. He just really doesn't want to be the one to have to deal with all of the problems if Taylor isn't around. We don't get to see what Taylor said. If anything, instead, the Emperor, Clow, is telling Phinia she's got God's blessing, though her ability wasn't given by God. But rather, as we know, it's something developed from how she lived her life, which is how she's so confident. The rest of the Imperial family looked up to Phinia, though it was empty remarks. She pretended not to know about it. We see Ed telling her to go easy on him, and she says the same thing to him. Some students mention how Ed was yelling at Taylor. One of them asks why he's making fun of someone who got bodied. Another suggests he's just trying to seem like a nice guy by cheering him on. Phinia says they are right about how Ed acts. In the past, he was definitely someone who was shameless, but there's got to be more to him now, since earlier, that was desperation when he was shouting to Taylor, and his words were all the truth. The match is called to start, and Phinia says his actions confuse her. She says she'll come to a conclusion with this duel and starts to cast magic. He says she'll shoot this as a test and launches an aqua ball at him. She wonders how he'll react and watches intently, but he doesn't do anything. And she's lost by this. He falls to the floor and says he lost. She starts to panic and says she watched him track the trajectory. The students watching begin to laugh, saying he's worse than Taylor, and it's a joke he got one hit. Ed tells Phinia he learned a lot, and she asks what he's planning. Then she realizes he's not even made contact with her a single time. She's declared the winner. She realizes he had no interest in the duel, and that's because Ed doesn't think there's any reason to. He needs to focus on making sure the story doesn't get changed, since Phinia is important to the story. But Taylor, the protagonist of the world, is arguably more important. He looks around, trying to figure out where he is. And Phinia calls out to him. He sees her panting, and he asks what she's doing here. She barks at him, saying that's her question. And he says he learned a lot from the duel. She chews him out, saying, "My ass." He didn't even intend to win, and he just wanted off the stage fast. She says she's already having a hard time with the fox-like merchant, she means Laurel, and how Glast is just a pile of grumpiness. All of this, and the servants won't shut up about living like a noble. She has enough to deal with, so why is he complicating her mind even more? He's surprised she has this much frustration. He grabs her shoulders, telling her to take a deep breath and to calm down, saying there's no need to get worked up. He guides her on breathing properly, and after a few deep breaths, she covers her face, asking what just happened. She looks flushed, saying to please forget about this. He starts to sneak off, and she says she's got a bad habit. She starts talking about how she's always trying to predict what's in people's heads, and Ed just wants to go. She says she'll ask bluntly, and that he cut his ties with his family since he knows about their dark side, right? The reason he picked on Taylor is because he needed a reason to be expelled. He says it's a sharp deduction, but it's mostly wrong. The dark side is correct, but he looks down and plays clueless. She says there's no way she is wrong and asks what those words he yelled at Taylor were about, asking if he never disliked him from the start. Ed says no, and he just wants to make fun of him, and since everyone hates him, he thinks cheering on Taylor would be good. She says anyone can tell he's lying and to look her in the eyes while he says it. He says he's telling the truth, and her insight detects it as a lie. He says he's telling the truth, and she starts stomping her feet. She starts to get hella mad but calms herself down, saying she can't say anything since she has no evidence. So she'll let him go, and he's been staring at the door for a while, right? He thanks her as he leaves, and he says this is the first time she's shown this side of herself, and it's his fault for being a new addition to the story. He says it may be a bit out of line, but she looks to run out, and it's important to pay attention to the complicated politics, but she should relax a bit. She shouldn't worry too much, especially while being in the academy. She's lived her entire life seeing through others, but this is the first time someone has seen through her. He begins to run, saying he's lost too much time. If Taylor gives up his comfortable life, and even the entire world might end. He finally sees him but doesn't know what to say. But we hear a woman's voice saying to stop, and it's Alia, Taylor's childhood friend. She says he's already having a hard time without him, so please don't harass Taylor. Taylor stands up, saying, "So you're still in school?" Ed sees that he's revived a fighting spirit that never falters, no matter how strong his enemy is. He sees now that while he was dueling Phinia, His biggest cheerleader Alia ran to him and consoled him. Taylor asks what business he has with him. Ed is hesitant, then says he saw he's great with the blade. Taylor wonders what he's scheming, but Ed turns around, saying he's not planning anything. He treated him like a pushover, but in reality, he doesn't need to, which relieves him since he's obviously the main character. But since Taylor is fine, that's all he needed. Taylor and Alia wonder why he's trying to act cool. He walks outside, then hears a loud sound. He looks over to see a giant fire pillar from the arena. He says everyone originally witnessed this while in their seats at the nail building as a giant fire spirit and Lortel cast some kind of ice spell, which freezes the beast. The ice starts to crack as we see Yunuka riding atop the spirit's head. She's smiling, and Ed explains how he's sure Taylor and Alia are watching this. Taylor looks surprised. He hopes Taylor is paying attention as one of his very first trials is about to start, which will be the final boss of this act, Yunuka. It cuts to her being congratulated by the students, and she thanks them while laughing. Then she looks over to see Lortel being carried out on a stretcher. She feels nothing but guilt, but the students around her won't stop saying how she's their pride. We see a whole group trying to praise her, and Ed says that Yunuka already had friends, but this incident stirred a lot of trouble for her. But it's for the better, as he won't be seeing her at the camp. 2 weeks later, he says without having to worry about the main characters, he could focus on survival, so he made a fishing net, and we see that his stats have increased a lot too, or he just wanted to flex. He steps out of the river, and we see Yunuka trying not to stare. She asks if he enjoys being naked. He asks what the hell she's doing here and why she keeps coming back. She says it's like a top-secret base, so it makes her excited. Also, she wanted to talk to him more, and she needed some advice. He asks what it is. She says he left early, so he might not have seen it, but at the combat training a few weeks ago, she hurt Lortel. He recalls that Lortel should have used intermediate magic, but it wouldn't be important for Yunuka to know. She says she keeps trying to forget the incident, but she can't help but think she overreacted. She asks if she should apologize, but her friends won't stop saying Lortel was in the wrong. Ed says to apologize if she thinks she's right. He explains how Yunuka is lovely and kind to everyone, so if she ever felt guilty or self-critical, everyone would just blindly take her side. So Yunuka probably came to him specifically because she knew he wouldn't follow suit. She stretches, saying she's glad he doesn't blindly take her side. He apologizes if it offends her. She says that's not it, she doesn't feel offended at all. She says Ed wasn't like this last year. She may be a bubbly person, but she is very observant. Even when he asked her for money, she could tell it was just him trying to chase her away. She says she finds him reassuring, she wishes everyone was more like Ed. And she laughs. The night continued. Then the next day, we see Ed walking down a hallway, saying this is hella bad. While The Failed Swordsman of Sylvania is considered a masterpiece, only a few people have seen the ending since most people get bad endings early on. If you save a girl during an ambush in a Cobalt test, you'll witness the secret of the Golden Daughter, Lortel. Then the Detective Conan guy would kill you in another episode. If you skip partying with Alia and form a unit with Lortel, Alia will fall off a cliff and die. If you protect Lortel from the fire spirit Tarkon that Yunuka summons, you die. We hear Lortel talking to Ed, and he says he needs to go quickly since she's nothing but bad endings. He asks how long she'll follow him, and she says she didn't think he'd ignore her for so long. He says of course he would, she's the fourth main heroine and the business magnate Elkin's only daughter. She smiles, saying she'd like to buy 2 hours of his time. He explains how she's designated as a hidden hero. Unlike Fenia, Lortel is treated like a villain from the start, and her true colors are only revealed later on into the story. When players finally learn her true nature, they are given a crossroad between Fenia and Lortel. She calls out to him again, and he ignores her, saying he can't fall for it since if he does, he'll lose his advantage. She says surely he can just hear her out, saying she just wants to help a little. She stops in front of him, saying that seeing him is an inspiration to her. Even under difficult circumstances, he continues learning. Of course, he's known for being arrogant and self-centered. She doesn't care about that, so listen to her offer. She says she'll give 3 gold coins as a down payment and she asks him to help her befriend Yunuka. He says those gold coins are some people's monthly earnings. He gets in her face, asking if she always buys connections with money. She puts the gold into his pocket, saying to keep it for now. In regards to his question, she knows the more people on her side, the better. He says she surely knows she's going to be in a political fight with Fenia over control of the academy, so she's starting to gain allies. He smiles, saying fine, and she smiles back, and they shake hands. He says that normally people who fall for this end up getting addicted, and some even sell their families away. So preying on that desperateness is simple. Sadly, that's how it should have been. We see the gold coins in her hand, and she smiles, saying that's amusing as she watches Ed leave. He grits his teeth, saying he really needed the money, but he can't get in between Yunuka and Lortel. Later that night, we hear Lortel call out to Yunuka. She says that she didn't expect to see her here. Yunuka says she looks really different with her hair down. Lortel looks very intent on making Yunuka one of her people. She tells Yunuka there was a lot of fuss about her using intermediate magic, and she wanted to apologize if given the chance. Yunuka says she can see her wounds haven't healed yet. Lortel says she's sure it'll heal quickly, so don't worry about it. Yunuka says her talk with Ed must have gone well. Lortel asks what she's suddenly saying. Yunuka says she usually tells them to restrain themselves, but the spirits sure do love to chatter. She tells her she sometimes catches on conversations. Lortel realizes that she must have heard her trying to pay Ed to befriend Yunuka. Yunuka walks beside her, saying you can't buy sincerity with money, and to her, the way it acts is much more approachable. Lortel awkwardly laughs, asking if she acted too smug, saying she's quite embarrassed, but she heads off, saying she needs to get going now, and it takes a lot of preparation to form a contract with a high-rank spirit. She's been getting more support, so she needs to work hard. She tells Lortel there's one more thing, and that she's sorry about the other day, saying she hopes she gets well soon. Lortel quickly realizes that she is very different than she imagined originally, but she says that Yunuka looks strangely on edge. We see Yunuka in her dark room, saying she has to work harder because when people expect good things from you. It jumps to morning, and we see Ed's clothes all being hung to dry, and Lucy says it reeks. His clothes get instantly knocked off as she flies off. We hear a woman asking who is there. He looks over to find the senior maid of the finest dorm, the awfulest hall. Her name is Belle Maya, and she's the one who kicked him out. He quickly explains to her the situation, but she looks around, saying Janica already told her, but she didn't think he'd be living like this. It's good to see a good change for him. Sadly, her words fell on deaf ears as he was staring elsewhere. He explains how the awfulest maids are all pretty much Olympic Giga Chad maids, and they are all forklift certified. He's staring at the basket she's carrying, saying it must be the best ingredients she could find in this forest. He starts to think if she'd affect the story, and she says he doesn't need to be so respectful. He can talk to her like when he was in the dorm. He says nah. She's surprised, and he asks how he could talk down to a maid who is always hardworking. He decides since she's not crucial to the plot, he should befriend her. She tells him about the stuff inside the basket. It cuts to later, and we see his upgrades, his fishing net, farm. He's got plenty of meat now, so his dietary needs are almost taken care of. He puts his cup on the campfire, then ignites the bottom to boil the water. We see that his wind and fire spells are both level 10 now, and he says he's been using them too damn much. He ended up making herbal tea due to the info Belle told him about. He takes a sip, saying he's done with his work now, yet the sun hasn't set, and he has to admit how much fun he's having. He spots something flying in from overhead, and he says of course something would happen. It crashes into his camp, completely knocking him down, and in the dust, he wonders what the hell is going on since his camp just got wiped out. He hears someone panting. Lucy says that just about killed her. He asks what she's talking about, and she shakes in fear, saying Belle Maya. He says she's a good person though. She says that she was really moody and came to her with her fist clenched, so she teleported out of there suddenly. She says she thought she was going to be hurt. Ed is pissed, and Lucy asks for food. He smacks her, saying she ruined everything. She says ow, and he quickly realizes she isn't using any protective spells. She tells him she ran out of magic. He laughs, saying that's a good thing, and this is for his house she destroyed. He flicks her forehead, then says this is for Miss Belle Maya and flicks her again. He says he needs a sturdier house, so he needs to build a house out of real wood, but being as busy as he is, it's a big plus to gain knowledge in the library. He says he figured most of it out, now he just needs to figure out how to smoothen the wood and finish the roof. A girl tells him it's closing time and says he's studying hard. He asks if it's been a while and apologizes. She says it's fine, and seeing someone work so hard boosts her motivation. She introduces herself as Elka Island. He says it's like she's using her puppy dog eyes to tell her his name. He reluctantly tells her his name, and she instantly makes an oh shit face. He says it's a familiar face, but it's fine since he's used to the discrimination now. She says he's hella different from the rumors. He's been reading all the books that are even too hard for her to understand, and he's read 6 of them easily. They all say he's arrogant, but they don't know him, and it seems like rumors aren't to be trusted after all. She says she knows someone who is just as sincere as he is. She says she'll be cheering for him, and he says thanks. She tells him to have a safe trip back, and she's going to clean up and head back to her dorm. Then a loud rumbling begins to shake the entire library. Elka looks up to see a shadow as a bookshelf and all of its books begin to fly toward her. As it's time for the episode 1 final showdown, the Glaskin Showdown, a large purple beam can be seen from the academy. We learn that thanks to Taylor and his friends' efforts, many students gathered at the main square. It's been 2 hours since the disaster started. Alia says she's seen this once. It's a summoning rune to summon the highest-ranked spirit of darkness, Glaskin. Phineas says this is bad news, as only one person can summon this many spirits, and it's highly likely that the person behind all of this went berserk due to Glaskin and that it's Yunuka failover. The students are speechless. Taylor says this isn't the time for this. If Alia is right, then the barrier around the students will only buy some time. If Glaskin is summoned, then there will be casualties, so they need to head inside the student center. The captain of the Royal Guard, Claire, says people outside the barrier will notice in no time, so if they deal with it soon. Alvera, an alchemy student, cuts him off, saying it's not a problem that can be dealt with outside. Even the principal Obel is out of town too, but if everyone here were to join hands, they might be able to take down a high-ranked spirit. A man named Klabaya says he's against it. Not only does she want them to get through the intermediate-level spirits, but then they'll have to deal with 2 high-ranking spirits, Tarkan and Valisfer. He says that's suicide, and he's not doing it. Lortel asks if she did this all on her own, saying this is way too much power. Alia says it's most likely Valisfor's power, and it's using her as a medium to manifest, and that spirits of darkness are the natural enemies of spirit sorcerers. Their enormous power is simply beyond a spirit sorcerer's control, and the demons take control of the spirit sorcerer, which is what all spirit sorcerers know. Yet how Yunuka was able to manage to command Valisfor isn't known to anyone. Zig says none of this matters, and the best thing to do is decide their course of action, and only one person can do that. So he asks Phineas about it. She's hesitant, and everyone looks at her, awaiting her order. Then she recalls Ed's words to her about having some peace of mind. She says if only it were that easy. She says they'll enter in an hour, but only her guard Claire, and the top students from each year in class. So make preparations and ready yourselves. She'll take responsibility for it all. Some random appear, saying they are done assessing the teaching area. The Audrey Hall and Potion Archives are in the middle of a strike, so they won't join. She says then it's all up to them. Then the random says there are no other students until a woman appears, saying there is one. She just came from the library, and there is her friend. An apprentice librarian with a sophomore student. Phineas asks for her friend's name. She says it's Elka Island. Zix asks if she's really talking about Elka. She says yes, and he says he needs to rescue her now since she's powerless. Lortel tells him to calm down, saying that Yunuka is their priority. Phineas says that's right, and she said Elka was with another student, so believe in the student for now. Phineas asks who the other student is, but the girl is scared. Zix grabs her, saying to spit it out. She mumbles Ed, saying it's Ed Roth Taylor. Zix looks furious. She apologizes to him, saying he was there until way late tonight. She was annoyed, so she left it to Elka, and they all know what type of man Ed is, right? But Elka doesn't care about rumors. The other students start to say it's not good if she's stuck with someone so shameless. Zix starts to get pissed, and Phineas and Lortel quickly try to stop him from leaving. Phineas tries to convince him to have faith in Ed. Everyone else is lost as how, and even she's a bit worried about what she said. Zix is silent, then leaps past them all, but he sees some spirits in front of him. He instantly defeats them, saying if he touches even a single hair on her head, he will rip his arms off. We finally get some backstory on Zix. We see him tracking something in the woods and he says he's found it while watching a deer from the bushes. A knife is visible, and the deer is surprised as it sees Zix flying at it from overhead. He kills it. Zix was a descendant of the tribes in the north, but he was abandoned long before any of this. We see people looking at him with fear and disgust while he drags the deer through the street. They recognize him as a descendant of the northern grasslands, a barbarian, and see him as a beast. A girl asks for his name. It's Elka. He tells her, and she laughs, saying he's like a wolf in a human's body. She is surprised and he drops the deer. She asks if he is okay. He begins to cry, realizing how lonely his life has been. Elka and her father welcomed him into their family. Chasing after the fast-paced life of civilization, his savage life became a distant memory at some point, and the wolf became a man. He says he's heard of the rumors about Ed, so he knows his reputation. He cheated on the test, insulted the princess, and harassed a woman. We see Zix hauling straight cheeks down the hallway. Then he spots Ed, who is bloodied up. He asks who he is, but Zix ignores him, asking where Elka is, and why he's here. Ed tells him where she is. Zix runs over him on his way to Elka, then opens the door, asking if she's okay. He sees her asleep with Ed's jacket covering her legs. He starts to shake, saying thank God and that he's genuinely grateful. He looks around, saying these bookcases are huge and would be hard for a fully grown man to lift, yet they are all placed as if they're trying to protect her, along with the curtains to block the spirit's vision. Then he sees on a chalkboard a note that says not to panic when you wake up and to wait here. Everything will be solved before dawn, so block the entrance and not act rashly. Zix realizes someone protected Elka. Then he notices blood on the jacket, and that it isn't hers. He starts to piece it together, noticing that the blood leads outside to where Ed was laying. So, Ed is the one who saved her. But why? Ed thinks that he was so close. 3 hours ago, when the bookcases started to collapse, he saved Elka. He says he's glad he did some strength training. Based on the rune in the sky, it's the Glaskin showdown. He's sure Taylor will do it and he should actively avoid the area with the main characters since he cannot let the future change. Even so, he cannot sit idly, and he begins to block everything off for Elka. He says he'll just study more until it's over. Then he says that what makes Yunuka's power so special is her strong command of spirit understanding and spirit connection. Since meeting spirits itself is part of Yunuka's talent and Ed can't see spirits, raising his spirit stat is close to impossible. He sees a group of spirits charging at him but prepares a wind spell. He thanked the event for the free meal, and his ignition leveled a few times, but his spirit connection and understanding both went to level 7. He says if only he could get it to one more level. The flashback ends, and he says one more level would have made it possible to contract a spirit. Zix comes out asking what he's doing here. Ed wonders why he's asking and tells him training. Saying he doesn't need to lie, Zix sighs and thinks to himself that only naive people would believe he's here training. It's true, though. Zix says he understands what kind of person he is now, and that it seems like this is who he has always been. He bows his head, saying he truly owes him a big one in the future and when the time comes, he'll repay this debt to him. Ed thinks to himself, saying he forgot Elka and Zix were lovers since she barely came into the story. But Zix is Taylor's friend who followed him from the start of the story, so he's important. Ed says he must have left the student center to come here. If he's confirmed Elka's safety, then go back and finish what he's meant to at the student center. He says to go help Taylor and do what he says. Zix asks if he means Taylor McClure. Ed says yes, and Zix says he doesn't know why he thinks so highly of Taylor, saying he's never talked to him. Ed says it's more complicated than that, but since the shell of Tarkan can only be harmed by element slash, it means Taylor has to be the one to defeat it. Zix thanks him again for the advice, and Ed says to move quickly. Ed sighs, watching him leave, saying he hopes it goes like the original story did. Then he says wait a minute, wondering why Zix isn't friends with Taylor yet, since they were meant to have sparred and Taylor uses element slash to cut through Zix's magic but still loses. They became friends. Then he realizes, since this whole scene happened so early, they never got the chance to meet. But this means Taylor doesn't know element slash either, so nobody in the raid team can deal any damage to Tarkan. He didn't even realize how much the plot had begun to fall apart from it. Back at the student center, Zix comes back saying he apologizes for how he acted. Phinia says to forget it. Even with him here, they'd have lost. They failed their first attempt. Claire says if they want to make another attempt, they need reinforcements and he'll join once the pain in his leg is gone. Phinia tells him to just rest since he can't even walk. He tells her that if she cares about him, she should resend her order. She says that she has a heart too. She says it's unfortunate, but Claire is out and Klabaya is also injured. She wonders if there's a way out. She says they just need to eliminate Tarkan, but we hear Ed saying there's not enough time to get to him. Some of them are afraid to see him, and he says judging from the ritual progress, it'll be complete soon. He says to split the groups into two. He'll take care of one side. He's being forced to intervene in the story. There's a whole strategy displayed. If any of you are curious, you can pause to read it. They are still lost on why Ed is here, and Klabaya asks if this looks like a joke. Zix tells him to hear him out first. Ed says they need to get through Tarkan and deal with Valisfur, who's overpowering Yunuka. But they've surely seen that Tarkan cannot be damaged due to his shell. The best bet is getting one team to take Tarkan's attention while the other group goes to subdue Yunuka. Lortel says there's no way. They only managed to escape due to luck. What will happen if the luring group fails and Tarkan starts to chase the other group, or if the luring group wipes out? It's too much of a risk. Ed says you can only weigh the risk when there are other options. The most important objective is to take down Yunuka, that way, Tarun is powerless. Zix asks who would be in the luring group. Alvera says that's just asking people to die. Taylor raises his hand, saying that he'll do it. Ed says no and tells Taylor not to act up and get back since he's going to be in the subjugation group. Taylor says he's quick, but if someone should do it, it should be him. Ed says they are wrong and they aren't picking sacrificial lambs. They don't exactly need to split in half either. He says that he, Klabaya and Lortel are enough to lure Tarkan. They both say they don't want to. Ed tries to tell them there's a wind to bind his feet, but they aren't interested. Phineas speaks up, saying she doesn't see anything wrong with what he's saying, but she doesn't understand his intentions. She sighs and says this is her order as the third princess. They'll split into 2 raid groups as Ed requested. The subdue group will have Taylor, Zix, Alia herself, and Alvera, and the rest, minus Claire, will be in the other group. She says she'll keep it short, so just don't die and stay safe at all costs. In the Nail Hall corridor, we see Tarkan, and Lortel asks how he's planning to do this. He tells her to just do what he says and they'll definitely win if they do. He tells Klabayas not to worry and explains how he lacks confidence. He tells him he'll definitely be able to do it. Klabayas says Ed looks full of confidence and wonders if he has a way. Tarkan begins to get up from laying down. He only came here because he was convinced by Phineas. He smiles, saying since he isn't alone, he might be able to muster some courage. He runs at Tarkan, who begins to roar. Klabias asks Ed how the hell he's meant to lure him out, but when he turns around, he sees both Ed and Lortel aren't there anymore. He starts to nervously sweat while Tarkan is behind him. Then he starts to breathe down his neck. He starts to run, yelling that he's been tricked. He yells, and we see Lortel outside. She exhales, then recalls the plan Ed told her, to get out of here while Klabias lures it. She asks if his plan is just to sacrifice him, saying he won't evade moral criticism. He says it isn't a sacrifice, and despite how Klabias looks, he's a top student and pretty strong. Also, the most important role will be Lortel's. Outside of the hall, we see her channeling a spell. We learn her job is to land a critical attack on Tarkan. She talks to herself, saying you really can't trust rumors. She tells Ed that everyone is going to hesitate and doubt themselves, but Lortel is good at this stuff. She launches her icicles at the side of the nail hall. We see a massive explosion, and the wall begins to collapse, creating a gap for the subjugation team to enter. She asks them all what they are doing standing there and tells them to go in. She says she broke the hall last time during the duel, and this must be why he left it to her. She says Ed is an amusing guy and this is all set up. She looks over and sees Klabias running away from Tarkan. She starts to prepare for her next attack while Klabias keeps hauling Cheeks away. She recalls Ed saying they can't defeat Tarkan inside the hall and apprehending it will be tough. She tries to tell Ed she lost to Tarkan once in the practice duels already, and he has a bag saying this will take care of Tarkan's shell. We see Ed making it upstairs, and Lortel shoots an attack off at Tarkan, then makes an ice wall to block it off. But Tarkan breaks through it. He says that she's right, without element slash, nobody can damage it. He kicks a door open for roof access, saying they just need overwhelming firepower. He finds Lucy slumped out and recalls the guide saying that Lucy is asleep on the Oval Hall. But he's done this so many times already. He picks her up and wonders how the hell she considers this a nap. He says she's here since the camp was destroyed and, since she's scared of Bel Maya, she'd always use her magic power to run away, then fall asleep. She wakes up, saying she smells jerky and sees it in Ed's hand. He shoves it into her mouth, then gets ready to launch her. He wonders if he'll get the distance right and yeets her, telling the rest to hide. Tarkan goes for a breath attack, and Lucy starts to cry, saying he's so mean. She lands right in the middle of them and begins to prepare an attack. She uses high-rank magic called Divine Punishment, and a giant purple cluster of lightning begins to streak down towards Tarkan, illuminating the entire courtyard as if the sun were out. Lortel shields herself and Klabias, and Ed has to hold on to the railing of the roof. He says this is important since Tarkan's shell is starting to break down. Now all attacks will land. He starts to run downstairs, saying the last hit will be his for the experience.